Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the Sodder family disappearance? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case. I'll move to the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. George Sodder was born in Italy in 1895. He moved to the United States in 1908. He worked in Pennsylvania for a while before moving to West Virginia for a better job. A few years later, he started a trucking company. George married a woman named Jenny, and they moved to Fayetteville, West Virginia. Between 1923 and 1943, the couple had 10 children. George was considered an upstanding citizen in the community, although sometimes he could be argumentative. He had strong negative feelings about the Italian dictator Mussolini, which led to arguments with some of his neighbors. About 6 months after Mussolini was executed, a life insurance salesman threatened George, telling him that his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed, which I guess is all the more reason to buy life insurance. Maybe that was part of his sales pitch. Sometime later, another man came looking for work. He wandered around the back of the house and identified 2 fuse boxes that he said were going to cause a fire someday. George believed that he was safe because the house had just been rewired, and the local electric company said it was fine. As Christmas approached in 1945, George's sons told him about a car that was parked on a nearby highway. There was a man in the car watching the Sodder children come home from school. This takes us to the timeline of the incident. On December 24, 1945, the Sodder family celebrated Christmas. George, Jenny, and 9 of their children were present. One of their sons, Joe, was away in the army. The oldest daughter had returned with gifts for her younger sisters. The children stayed up past their usual bedtime to enjoy the presents. By 10 p.m., George and his 2 older sons were asleep. George's wife Jenny prepared for bed and told 2 of her sons to bring the cows in and feed the chickens before going to bed. At 12:30 a.m., now on Christmas Day, Jenny woke up to the phone ringing. She walked downstairs to answer it. She heard a female voice she did not recognize. The caller asked for a name that Jenny never heard of. There was a sound of laughter and glasses clinking in the background, like the caller was at some type of Christmas party. Jenny told the caller that she had the wrong number and hung up the phone. As she did this, the woman laughed in a weird way. Before returning to bed, Jenny drew the curtains closed and turned off the lights downstairs. Jenny believed that her children were sleeping on the first floor, second floor, and in the attic, so the children were kind of scattered throughout the whole house. At 1 a.m., Jenny's sleep would once again be interrupted. On the roof of the house, she heard a loud banging sound followed by a rolling noise, like something was thrown from the ground on top of the roof and was rolling off of it. Or one could argue maybe it was a sleigh pulled by 8 tiny reindeer that had just landed. Jenny didn't think anything of it and went back to sleep. At about 1:30 a.m., yet another disruption would occur. Jenny woke up after smelling smoke. She jumped out of bed and found there was a fire around a fuse box and a telephone line in George's office. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children escaped the burning house. John, age 23, George Jr., age 16, Marion, 17, and Sylvia, who was 2 years old. These surviving members of the family could not make it up to the bedrooms on the second floor or to the attic due to the fire. They yelled to the children who they believed were in the attic, but did not receive a response. Jenny tried to call the fire department, but the house phone didn't work. It had worked earlier because she received that call from a person she didn't know. Jenny ran to a neighbor's house. As this was going on, George looked for a ladder that was typically resting against the house, but he couldn't find it anywhere. Later, it was found 75 feet away at the bottom of an embankment. George climbed up the exterior wall of the house without a ladder and broke a window, but apparently he couldn't get in the window. He then went to start 2 of his trucks, thinking that he could position them so he could climb through the window. The trucks had been operated the previous day. They were running fine, but they failed to start at this time. The fire raged on for about 45 minutes, and the house collapsed. Presumably, the 5 children trapped in the house died. Maurice, age 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5 years old. Some of the children had been on the second floor, others in the attic. Firefighters did not arrive until 8 a.m., even though the fire department was only 2.5 miles away. Given this response time, I don't know if they can really call it a fire department. It's more like a smoldering department, because that's all that's happening by the time they arrive. There were 2 problems with their response. 1, the chief didn't know how to drive the fire truck, and 2, the fire department used a phone tree system where one person would be notified by the operator, that person would then contact another firefighter who then would call someone else. So it was just a clunky system, and it took them a long time to get ready. There are different stories about what the firefighters found at the scene. One story is that they didn't find any of the bones of the children, but another story is that they did, but did not want to tell the parents. The state fire marshal wanted to search more thoroughly and investigate the cause of the fire, but 4 days after the fire, George used a bulldozer to push 5 feet of dirt over what was left of the house. The official cause of the fire was determined to be faulty wiring. One of the members of the coroner's jury that made this determination was the salesman who threatened George. The 5 missing children were declared dead on December 30, 1945. There was still no clarity on what remains, if any, had been recovered. Sometime after the fire, various circumstances came to light which were suspicious. Here are a few examples. As I mentioned, the ladder was recovered 75 feet away from where it was normally stored. The Christmas lights had stayed on for some time after the fire was raging, which did not seem consistent with faulty wiring. The heat of the fire would have been insufficient to completely destroy the remains of the 5 victims. The telephone line for the house had been cut, which explains why Jenny couldn't call the fire department. There was a rumor that a man admitted to stealing a block and tackle from outside the Sodder residence, perhaps something they would use to lift engines out of vehicles. The man also admitted to cutting the phone line, although his intent was to cut the power line. Seems like this individual would be a very good suspect, but there is no arrest record, so there's no way to know if this was actually true. Other circumstances were somewhat explained. For example, George's sons may have flooded the engines of his trucks in a rush to get them started. And the mysterious wrong number caller was identified. She said it was just a wrong number. It was not part of some conspiracy to burn down the house. George and Jenny were not sure if the 5 children had actually died. They started to think that maybe they were out there somewhere alive. In 1946, new information became available. A bus driver said that they were driving through Fayetteville on Christmas Eve in 1945 when they saw people throwing balls of fire at the house. The story appears to be consistent with what Jenny heard at 1 a.m. the morning of the fire. One of the Sodder children found objects near the house that looked like rubber balls. Other witnesses came forward and said that they had seen the children, who had ostensibly been killed in the fire. One witness said that they saw them looking out of a car that was driving away from the burning house. Another witness said that she served them breakfast at a rest stop between Fayetteville and Charleston. The car they were in had Florida tags. The fire chief would later admit that he had attempted to fabricate remains of the children to convince George that the children were dead. A pathologist named Oscar Hunter conducted a new search at the site of the burnt house in August of 1949. Oscar found several small bone fragments, which he sent out to be examined. They turned out to be vertebrae from a 16 or 17-year-old human. The oldest victim of the fire was 14. In addition, the bone had not been exposed to fire. Eventually, it was determined that the bones came from a nearby cemetery. How this happened was never explained. The Sodder family started to become more committed to the idea that their 5 children were alive. In 1952, they put up multiple billboards offering a reward for the children. One was on the site of the fire. More unconfirmed sightings were reported. One witness stated that she saw the children in a hotel in Charleston. Another witness said that Marion was in a convent in St. Louis, Missouri. In 1967, a woman in Houston said that 2 of the children were living in Texas. Nothing came from all these reports, but then Jenny was sent a letter postmarked in Central City, Kentucky, that appeared to be promising. The letter contained the photograph of a man who looked to be around 30 years old. His features resembled those of Louis Sodder. The name Louis Sodder was written on the back of the photograph. There was no return address. For years, George Sodder chased down many leads, including this one, but none of them went anywhere. He traveled all over the United States. George Sodder would die in 1968 at age 73. Jenny Sodder would die about 20 years later. Her children would remove the billboard from the site of the fire at this time. The youngest member of the Sodder family, Sylvia, died in 2021. Now moving to my analysis. There are 2 main questions in this case. What caused the fire, and did the children die in the fire? So, first looking at the cause of the fire. George effectively destroyed the potential crime scene with a bulldozer. The scene of the fire was never properly investigated. It's difficult to have any confidence in any conclusion made by local officials. There is evidence that supports the arson theory, including the witness account of fireballs, the man stealing property and cutting the phone line, threats received prior to the fire, and Jenny hearing sounds on the roof just before the fire started. At the same time, faulty wiring was a major problem in the 1940s. It caused many fires. It would not be unusual to hear of wiring leading to a disastrous fire. I think the fire could have been arson, but without a real investigation, there's just no way to know. Even if it was arson, that doesn't mean that there was some type of conspiracy to kidnap the children. Which brings me to the second question. Did the children actually die in the fire? One of the surviving Sodder children, John, originally said that he tried to physically wake his siblings in the attic before leaving the house. So he put his hand on them and shook them. He knew that they were actually in the house. Later, he changed his story, saying he called to them but never actually saw them or touched them. If he had stayed with his original story, that would have ended any speculation about the children being alive. The major confusing factor in this case would be the remains of the children. It seems unlikely the fire could have destroyed their skeletons. Why didn't anyone find the remains? Here's what I think happened. I think that the children were killed in the fire, and local officials found some remains. They did not want to upset the Sodder family any more than they already were, so they didn't show them the remains that were recovered. Everybody knew that the children died in the fire, so they didn't think anything of just discarding the evidence and failing to document the investigation. As the years passed, George and Jenny started to believe the children were alive, and the couple grew paranoid. Sometimes when they had a lead on where one of the children might be, they didn't tell anybody because they thought that the mafia or other figures were out to get the children. George traveled to different places to follow up on leads, as I mentioned. It was clear he was grasping at straws. When rumors about the children being alive started circulating, witnesses came forward and made up stories. This is not unusual. Other parties wanted to get in on the action. Therefore, they developed creative interpretations of their perceptions, and they were deceptive. I think that the devastating loss of the 5 children was too much for George and Jenny to accept. They were able to build conspiracy theories based on the low-quality investigation into the fire. Now moving to my final thoughts. What I find so peculiar about this case is that the vacant lot where the house was is still there. The ground didn't go anywhere. It's not like it vanished. So the bones of anyone killed in the fire are probably still there. If the community really wanted to figure out the mystery, or wanted a good chance of figuring it out, they could excavate that entire site and go through every particle using the modern technology available now. I think that the bottom line is that everyone knew what happened. There isn't really a mystery, just a conspiracy theory. Those are my thoughts on the Sodder family disappearance. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis as intriguing as a slow-moving fire department. Thanks for watching.